All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings. I'm here with Jason Oun, as he is known, and you will be able to see that because we are recording on Zoom, Jason. We are not on Skype, which we were using before. The idea is that hopefully Zoom will be cleaner, there'll be less lag, and we'll have a better viewing and listening experience for our listeners. So hopefully that works out. How are you doing today, Jason?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I mean, it kind of fits within our theme for this week's episode. Zoom seems like the new thing, the new trending, and we're talking about young viewers and young wrestlers this week, and so kind of fits in with the theme this week.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about when we were doing this is I've put a lot of thought into like what wrestling needs to do to attract young viewers, and also what young viewers want or get, or what their experience is like in pro wrestling. And one of the things I wanted to do with this podcast, and one of the things that appealed to me about it when I was first pitching it to you last year was we're both guys in our mid-20s, and we have a experience with wrestling that is different than the experience of perhaps the majority of fans. And we'll get into that data. But, a lot of fans are, have witnessed the Attitude Era firsthand and, remember Hulk Hogan and, when they were kids. And we're not like that. We don't have those firsthand memories. Our experience with wrestling, like when I was 10 years old, like John Cena was the biggest star. And it's just a different type of experience. And that I think that's the kind of perspective that we can bring to the wrestling sphere. Obviously, there are other people in their 20s doing wrestling podcasts, but just something that's different than what I was seeing, which is like a lot of people focusing on how things compare to the Attitude Era or Hulk Hogan era or the Monday Night Wars or whatever people's idyllic version of wrestling was in their youths and how it relates to today. And I sometimes feel like there's a disconnect on that end. So I'm happy to bring kind of our perspective as younger people. And I'm always interested in knowing, like, even today, like what teenagers think about wrestling, people who, are 10 years younger than me. And that's something that we wanted to do. And so I'm excited to do this show today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also not only with John Cena on the WWE end, but also we grew up on the indie, so to speak, where Kevin Steen and LJ Generico were the guys, and even Chris Hero was, the hottest indie guy out there. And so we have a different perspective from people in the Attitude Era where the indie scene wasn't, it was kind of non-existent in some ways.
Well, just being in, growing up in the age of the internet and growing up in the age of social, when I was 10, social media wasn't really a thing, but when I was 15, it certainly was.
Yep.
And how that's changed wrestling. And but so what I wanted to get into today was we wanted to talk about kind of the current wrestling landscape and how that relates to young viewers. And I wanted to start with some data. I gathered some data here. And I think something that catches people by surprise is when people find out how old the average wrestling viewer is. I think a common misconception is that wrestling is something that is catered towards young people, and that there's a ton of kids. Obviously, WWE's PG, it's kid friendly, everyone's a kid there. And the answer, if you look at the demographics, is that it's not the case. Is that wrestling's the average wrestling fan is quite old. How old? Well, I'll tell you how old. So this was a study from 2019, and it had the average television viewers age of various professional sports leagues and organizations. So the average wrestling fan, how old do you think the average wrestling viewer was, Jason?
In 2019,
yeah.
I would have to guess like 28. Is that too young?
So it was 54 years old.
Wow.
Now I think so. I'm glad you said 28 because I think a lot of people think that, right? But the reality is, for starters, old people people over the age of 50 make up a larger spectrum of the population than younger people. The baby boomer generations are our largest generation of Americans. And so those people are going to be older. People who watch television are going to be older. Younger people are not going to watch television, typical cable television, at the same rate as older people. Older people are going to be watching, traditional cable. Younger people, you just got more stuff. They're more likely to play video games. They're more likely to stream stuff. They're more likely to just spend 2 hours refreshing their Twitter or Instagram feeds. So I think a lot of people think it like, oh yeah, wrestling's for young people. Now, how does that compare to some other sports? So wrestling, out of the sports that were surveyed in this study, was the third oldest skewing sport. You had horse racing, which the average age viewer was 63. You had baseball, which was 57 years old. And then you had wrestling at 54. And then some other sports, football, average viewer was 50 years old. Boxing, 49 years old. Basketball, 42 years old. And soccer, 39 years old. So you got soccer and basketball as kind of the more youthful skewing sports, which I think most people would agree makes sense. And then you got horse racing and baseball as the older skewing sports. I don't think they had golf. Otherwise, I'd throw golf as probably older skewing too. But I think that adds up with people's perceptions, is that some sports are kind of more popular with older groups and some sports are more popular with younger groups. Mm-hmm. And so, man, 54 years old, that is really old. Now, to your point, Jason, about your assumption that the average age was 28, in 2000, there was a similar survey done, and the average age of a wrestling viewer of WWE, this did not include anything else, didn't include WCW, and WCW had a slightly older skewing base at the time, so you can maybe add on a few years to this. But in 2000, the average wrestling viewer was 23 years old. Wow. So that was 20 years ago, but the average age was 30 years younger than what it was in 2019. And so a lot of people still have that image where like wrestling's this, cool, rebellious kind of violent graphic thing that's attractive to young people, and older people are like, oh no, that's barbaric. But as time has gone on, as we've gotten further and further away from the Attitude Era, the wrestling audience is skewing much older. And people can say, oh, why is that a big deal? Well, I can tell you why that's a big deal, and we talked about it a lot this week, and that is the key demographic, the key advertising demographic. And I mean, people have probably heard the key demo. People have hemmed and hawed on the key demo forever now, so I don't really have to explain it. But essentially, 18 to 49 is the key demographic for advertising. It's what advertisers want to spend their money on generally. And so television shows that do well in that demographic are more valuable to advertisers, which in turn make them a more valuable property to networks. And so with like AEW, the reason the key demo is really important is because if they can show that they're attracting a younger audience that's attractive to advertisers, the network, whether it's TNT or who else they would decide to pursue, we'll see that as a potentially lucrative property to have on their network, and we'll spend a lot of money on it. And we all know TV money is everything now in wrestling. And so that's kind of the specifics of it. But with the average wrestling fan, the average wrestling viewer, again, this is 2019. I would say that it might actually be, even though it's 2 years ago, you could argue that it's actually been younger because AEW wasn't around really in 2019. I think that they hadn't started, Dynamite hadn't started when this study was published. But the idea is that AEW being able to attract a younger audience can make up for the fact that it may be not acquiring the biggest audience. And but that's all demographics. I don't really want to get too far into the demos. I really want to talk more about the nuts and bolts of what it takes to attract younger viewers, what we see in wrestling that appeals to us as younger people or even people younger than us, and how different companies are attempting to do that. I'll start with you, Jason. As a young person, what do you think a wrestling product should have or has had or needs to have to attract someone of your age and your demographic?
Right. I mean, I think it needs a variety in terms of wrestling styles, because I think we've seen over the years that, like, obviously people love their traditional NWA style, all the headlocks and all those kind of things, but also see that, hey, guys are athletic now, they can do a lot of flips, and while you need to be more efficient with those, people still like the high flying style. But at the same time, look at AEW, for example. You have Young Bucks, who represent the sort of, quote, modern style, so to speak. And you have FTR, who represent that old school style. And that's a really good balance within your companies of the in-ring product. obviously for we're talking about television as well. These are both television products, and you're trying to present a good viewing experience. I think you just need something that's more vibrant, something that's dynamic in terms of camera work. I think that's something about on my mind because I've been listening to the Dark Side Eyes, and that's something they've been talking about, especially since they did an FMW episode. Like they talk about how this dramatic camera work that FMW implemented is not really implemented in modern wrestling, kind of in modern wrestling and WWE and even AEW is guilty of it sometimes too. It's just you kind of just point the camera there. You're not really looking for any dynamic sort of shots to really elevate any sort of stories. You're kind of just relying on the bring stuff. We're shooting television too. Also, it's not just an indie product. We're shooting television, and so we need something more dynamic with the camera work, not like shaking the camera everywhere or a million edits like Kevin Dunn does, which may have worked at the time, but not right now.
If they shift the camera a million times, we wouldn't know Chris Jericho fell into a crash pad.
I mean, yeah, that's true as well. But it's just a variety is what I'm looking for.
I think you raise a really good point on both ends. I think from a aesthetic approach to what makes pro wrestling different. I like that AEW does. It's really small. I don't know how many people even care about it, but kind of like the general theming around like when they show the intro or they show the AEW logo is they've got the bright color powders, like the ones you would see on like a color run, like there are a million different colors, and I think that makes it have life. The Raw being red and SmackDown being blue is iconic. I don't think that they really should change that. I don't think Raw should just be a million colors now. I think Raw should be red, SmackDown should be blue. It'd be dumb to change it when you have that, but it's nice to see a wrestling company have kind of a more colorful approach to just their overall aesthetic, to whether it's the set, whether it's the ring ramp, the logo, what you're putting on the aprons, that kind of thing. Stylistically, like as far as like an in-ring style is that you kind of touched on, is another interesting thing about the like respective attention spans of younger people.
Right.
What do younger wrestling fans, they are gonna crave a faster, high-paced style. When I was a kid, when I was 10, one of my earliest kind of memories in thinking something was awesome in wrestling, it wasn't John Cena, it wasn't The Undertaker, it wasn't Kane, it wasn't Triple H. It was Paul London. He was the Cruiserweight champion on SmackDown, and he would just, this guy, would come out and he'd do flips and he'd do all these cool moves, and I totally loved that, and it started a lifelong passion for junior heavyweight wrestling that I have, and I've always been a big fan of high flying and stuff like that. And it started, when I was a kid and I saw some guy do some cool athletic shit. Like that's ultimately what it is. And I do think that that's, culpable when it comes to attracting younger viewers is pushing that kind of faster athletic aesthetic, as opposed to maybe a more traditional thing. I think with FTR, they're kind of interesting because they don't do a bunch of out dives and hurricanranas and all this stuff like that, but they don't wrestle like slow as shit. Like they're not like locking on this rest hold for 5 minutes, and they're not like, we're gonna do this 30-minute Broadway and we're gonna only do stuff for the last 5 minutes. They kind of like they're really interesting with their like style, because they'll wrestle the Young Bucks and they'll wrestle like a fast-paced wrestling match, but they're doing like the old school moves and they're focusing on a body part, and they're cutting guys off. They they use the traditional, I guess, philosophy, even if they're not doing like a 60-minute NWA, style, like they're kind of presented as.
Yeah, I mean, you even look at like just the presentation of them as well. Like they obviously look like, like even mentioned during the Blood and Guts match, like what's his name? Harwood, he wholly embodies like an Arn Anderson, just like in this sort of modern version of him as well. And yeah, you bring up a good point with like the sort of high flyers that catch people's attention. Like I remember this anecdote from years ago, like Bill Simmons, like he would talk about like Neville when we first saw him for the first time. He's like, oh my god, this guy's doing all these crazy things, he's gonna be the next big star. Obviously I didn't turn out that way, but still, like just to capture a casual fan's perspective, which I consider like a Bill Simmons, like he's a very casual person. And so to really capture that is really important. It reminds me of this Grapplers Anonymous video. Like Brandon Thurston was doing this class about teaching the students and like talk about believability and just things that are sort of real in a sense, because obviously like nowadays fans understand like wrestling scripted. They, especially these shoot interviews, people understand how scripted wrestling is, and so to see a Jeff Cobb throw people around, that's real and like that's sort of visceral in that sort of way. Even Walter, his chops, like you can't fake a chop. Like obviously the kicks and for all the super kicks and all that, but chop, like that's a real chop you're taking for Walter, and so that's really attractive to see those kind of guys, all these sort of I guess real things in a scripted sport.
Yeah, and I think that for new fans, right? You're trying to show someone who's a new fan, who probably might be would be a younger person if you're just trying to create a new young generation of wrestling fans. There is the default position that people who do not watch wrestling, the number one thing people who do not watch wrestling think about pro wrestling is that it's fake. Yes. And that like it's this con that they try to convince you that it's real and only an idiot would think that it's real. And that puts wrestling kind of on the back foot because that's a tough hurdle to climb. It's an interesting dynamic because I think if you were to watch like a reality television show like Real Housewives or something, and you see like, oh, the women got in a fight, and I can watch that and be like, guys, this is like clearly scripted and like they didn't really get in that fight. It's all being done for the cameras. And even people will kind of admit that, but they'll be more likely to suspend their disbelief watching that or watching reality television, or even things like is it Jake Paul and Floyd Mayweather? Or
I was gonna bring that up. Like everyone knows that's a work. Like Jake Paul's working everybody.
But people, because it's not pro wrestling, because it's boxing and it's real, that people will buy into that kind of tension as being more legitimate than it really is, as opposed to wrestling, which just has years and years of baggage when it comes to trying to convince people that it's real. And I think, to get to your point, when people see whether it's things like Walter chopping someone or Jeff Cobb doing some crazy feat of strength, or someone like your Ricochets or your Will Ospreays doing a bunch of crazy flips, it sells the idea that yes, these guys are fake. Yes, these guys are, this might be a choreographed routine that they're doing. But as long as the guys, you can say those guys come across as real athletes. If I go into Boston and I, am in Faneuil Hall and I'm seeing some buskers, like, have you seen the guys that do flips over people? Like their entire street gimmick is there's like 6 of them and they all like line up with like their heads like bowed down, and someone will run and do like a crazy front flip.
Yep.
Like, I'm like, okay, well, they clearly practice this a lot, but who cares? This is awesome. Like that guy just flipped over like 6 people, and that's kind of like how wrestling can sell. It's like, okay, yeah, these guys are choreographed and they've done this before, but it doesn't make it not cool. And I think like when people talk about, what match would you show to someone who isn't a wrestling fan to tell them, to get them to be a wrestling fan or get them interested. A lot of people pick like all-time great matches or really memorable matches or matches with hot crowds. And I get that. But I always think about like a match like the Will Ospreay versus Ricochet match that went viral a few years ago and led to the Will Ospreay Vader match and all that stuff, where people finally started really having a debate about this is all, people getting mad that it was choreographed and such. But that's the kind of match that I think you can show to somebody who does not know anything about wrestling, and they'll be intrigued because the guys are sick athletes and they're doing all this cool stuff and it's very eye-catching. And I do think that that's important. I don't think you can't create new fans with like an epic, psychologically intense, like years-long storyline culminating in a match. That stuff's there for current fans, so they remain invested in the product over time and, buy a pay-per-view. When it comes to creating new fans, you have to hit them with some immediacy. And whether it's pushing athleticism or the more realistic moves in pro wrestling, I think that's a key element. And especially when it comes to younger people who, are living in this environment where wrestling is fake and everyone knows it's fake and UFC is real. and MMA is real and everything else is real, and why would you spend time watching these guys fake fight when you could watch people real fight? And I think that's a real thing. Look, when you were like in middle school or high school, like, was wrestling popular?
No, it was not.
Yes, it was not. As sad as I can say, I wish it was, but it wasn't. I have a close friend from high school who's into wrestling as much as I am, and we go to shows together. And there's a few other people that will tag along with us from time to time. But that was pretty much, I would think, like the extent of people I was in high school with that liked wrestling.
Yeah.
MMA was big. Anderson Silva, Georges St. Pierre, Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, like that. I wouldn't say those people were like everyone knew who they were, but the people who probably would have been wrestling fans, 10 or 15 years prior were into MMA. And those people had a grand old time teasing me about my wrestling interest because they like the real stuff. And you're just like this little kid that likes the fake stuff. And that's what it was like. And I do think that people kind of take that for granted, especially older people.
Yeah, 100%.
I think people take for granted the idea that people who are our age and younger, like, know what pro wrestling is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that when it comes to like I said, wrestling wasn't popular when I was a kid. It was more popular than it is now, but it was coming off of the highs of the Attitude Era. There weren't a ton of people. You can look at the viewership and it will show, in 2001, this many people watched Raw and SmackDown, and in 2007, this many people watching them, and it's a downward slope. And I do think that, like, I had when I had some roommates and I was watching wrestling, and both my roommates were around my age, and they came in, and like, they didn't know anything about pro wrestling. They didn't know who any of the big stars were. They didn't know like what a match looked like. They didn't know like they knew it was fake. Oh, they told me, "Isn't this fake, Jesse?"
Yeah.
And my response to that always is, "It is." Like shocked, like you don't know that it's fake, but they just didn't know even the fundamental basics around wrestling. And I'm not blaming them, but that just shows wrestling was not as ubiquitous when we were kids as it was then if people were kids in the 90s or the 80s, when it was legitimately like talk of the school, or as I'm told to believe, talk of the school kind of thing. And I think that's a key thing, because we're now talking about people who are in their 20s who expendable income to spend on wrestling, that don't even have any familiarity with wrestling whatsoever. So even if there was like a hot wrestling angle, those people aren't going to just suddenly start watching wrestling because they don't have any familiarity with it. They don't have any fond memories of watching wrestling when they were kids. They don't really even know what wrestling is, so they're not going to get super into it. Like, there could be some amazing storyline in cricket right now, like some sort of credible rivalry that everyone in the cricket world is captivated by. And I'm not going to watch it because I don't know anything about cricket. I know a little bit about the rules. I think I played it once in gym class. I don't care. Like, I don't care because it's not on my radar screen and it never has been. And I think that's this, to use that as an example for me, but I think that's what a lot of people like wrestling. And the key is, how do you get some of those people who don't know anything about wrestling, who are super unfamiliar with wrestling, how do you get them invested in your product?
Yeah, that's always the difficult thing, especially when trying to get someone that doesn't know about wrestling to try something new. And that's always the difficult thing, is to get people into something they don't know about, because people just have it's a natural hesitancy to like, oh, this is so new. There's this gatekeeping sometimes with anything, like not just wrestling, just like any sort of like the community, other like a football or whatever, even like Marvel, even movies, like there's like big gatekeeping. It's like, oh, this, oh, you didn't know that, John Cena's a 16-time champion. Yeah, it's intimidating. And I think this sort of gatekeeping doesn't help, just sort of alienating fans. You try and be welcoming as much as possible. And that's why there's sometimes AEW gets criticism for like adding too much of sort of insider sort of things. It's like, okay, you're kind of confusing fans. Sometimes there's some validity in that, and I don't really believe in that totally. But I think what they are doing right is one of their top new stars in Darby Allen. Like, he is such a relatable person in that he is this very scrawny guy that continues to persevere over and over again, no matter how much he gets beaten down. That's a very relatable trait. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why, he's such a big ratings draw, especially in that key demo. Look at the minute by minute number. Every time a Darby Allen match or a segment comes in, like those numbers spike up because people want to watch Darby Allen sort of overcome the odds in whatever circumstance he's in. And I think that's a very relatable thing. Even audacity, like people, he really captures the meme culture that's going on right now because he's a lazy wrestler who's also secretly a really good wrestler at the same time, and obviously he has all his gimmicks and all that stuff, and it's pretty ambitious. I think right now where we're seeing from this past week, he might be in a world title match, and like that's really interesting that like there's clearly something there within Orange Cassidy that is really clicking with a lot of people right now.
Yeah, I mean, as a hardcore wrestling fan, I kind of would prefer to see Pac versus Kenny Omega, just because that's obviously an amazing match. And people made this argument, like, Orange Cassidy's hotter than Pac right now. He's got more fans than Pac. People would be more interested in seeing Orange Cassidy than they would seeing Pac. And if they do end up with a full arena or a full, Daily's place is filled up, which is what they're trying to do for Double or Nothing, and I'm pretty bullish. I think they're going to sell out. It's going to be, magnificent, because those people are going to love Orange Cassidy and they're going to be reacting to him huge, and they're really going to buy into him, and it's going to create a really interesting dynamic. But yeah, I like that you brought up Darby Allin, because ultimately what's going to keep, I think, getting people invested in it is going to be characters and personalities that people feel are relatable to them. And Darby, what I've always thought about this about Darby, when he was on the Indies, and then really when he got signed by AEW, was he has a level of authenticism to him that very few wrestlers have. He really isn't playing a character. He's a character on the screen in the sense that you can kind of summarize him like, oh yeah, he's like kind of like this goth skateboard kid who can just like always keeps getting up and can take, gets tossed all over the place, but he always finds a way to win and persevere. Like, you can explain his character to someone in 5 seconds, but he's not like, you don't feel like he's like, I met Darby Allin in real life, it would be, I feel like my experience would be like super similar to meeting him, like the what it would be like seeing him do an interview in character, because it feels like he has a level of raw authenticism to him. And also his character is just super relatable to people, in the sense that either we were Darby Allin in high school, or we knew people like Darby Allin in high school, or we wanted to be people like Darby Allin in high school, where he was just kind of like this cool rogue guy. And I think that's why you're seeing him really connect with younger people. There's a lot of evidence out there. The quarter hours show that he's a legitimate ratings draw, which he really has become the first person on AEW's roster. I guess you could say MJF too, but Darby Allin feels like the first person on AEW's roster that AEW has turned into like a ratings draw and a star. Yeah. Like, you can say, okay, Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Cody, Hangman Page, like those guys were kind of already made by the time. I think people like Hangman have come a long way, but they were already kind of seen as big stars before. Darby was someone who they brought in as, okay, this is someone who's going to be interesting. Let's see how he does. And he succeeded to an incredible degree. I was at the second AEW Dynamite taping, which is when he was kind of named number 1 contender, and he was going to wrestle Chris Jericho the next week. And he skated down the ramp on a skateboard and hit the move. And it was awesome. Everyone was popping big for it because it was a great spot. And then I was stuck in traffic, getting out of the park. I was parked in the parking garage underneath the arena, and I was like in the, the classic like 17-hour traffic jam trying to get out of the garage. And when I was kind of, slowly making my way out, we passed by where like the ring trucks were, and, and you could see some talent was kind of milling about, kind of waiting to, get back to the hotel or whatever, where they were going. And I saw it was Kip Sabian, it was Darby, and it was I'm trying to think who the other person was. It was a woman. It might have been Penelope Ford. That would make sense. But like Darby was there, and he had his backpack, and he had his skateboard, and he had his hood over, and he was just kind of like chatting these guys. I'm like, and this was like real life, like he's not like in character. He's just kind of waiting for his ride, and it sounds dumb, but like I was like, oh my god, that's like who he is in real life. Look at him, like he's the same, and that's a level of authenticism that you get, and that's important to what we were talking about before, which is people coming to wrestling and thinking that it's fake. And obviously this guy's a character. He's not really like that. But when you blur the line and you play a character that's so authentic, that feels so real, you can sell the idea that you're really cheering for this person, the human being, and not just this character that's entertaining on television. I think that's a big thing in, clearing that barrier that people might have into getting into wrestling. And Darby being, I think he's 26, 27, that
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and that helps. And we can go into that if you want, about pushing younger wrestlers that younger people can relate to, which sounds like a no-brainer, but is historically been a big challenge for WWE, and is kind of something that AEW has some leverage on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's look at the champions. WWE champion right now is Bobby Lashley. He's over 40. Roman Reigns.
I think he's like 44.
Yeah, at least around there. And so Roman Reigns, who's mid 30s or so, like 34.
Him and Drew were both 35 when I was looking at it like a month or two ago. So I'm going to assume they're both 35. They might have turned 36, but I think they're 35.
Yeah, and so basically you have, it's not too old, like a Bobby Lashley, like 44, but still it's leaning a little bit older there, especially look at like football, for example. 35-year-old quarterback, you're kind of considered an old quarterback. Like Matt Ryan's considered an old quarterback. And so which just use that as an example there for Roman Reigns. And then, when you go on from there, like all the your top two champions in your company are pretty much on the older side, and there's no really line of succession in terms of younger wrestlers. The contenders are Braun Strowman and Drew McIntyre for Bobby Lashley. Like we said, Drew McIntyre is like 35, 36. Braun Strowman, not exactly on the younger side either, like is mid-30s as well. And then Edge, I guess, might be the next contender for the Universal Championship. We don't know. SmackDown's tonight, so maybe we'll find out later tonight. But Cesaro, he's like close to 40. He's also 40, a contender. Yeah, and so all these contenders are also pretty on the older side as well.
Yeah, I mean, you could talk about WWE, their system takes a really long time for someone to go through it to reach the top, and that they're really slow at pushing people to the top. I think that's part of it. But it's historically, you look back at the Attitude Era, okay? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I did this not that long ago when I was looking at I think we even talked about on this show, kind of talked about how the Royal Rumble, like the average age of someone in the Royal Rumble was like 41 years old in the men's Rumble. And you just don't see you don't see a lot of younger wrestlers. And you could say, well, it's WWE. Wrestlers have to take a long time, getting years, a decade or more of experience before they're ready for that role. But the reality is that wrestling has always been kind of seen as something like a young person. The younger stars have always been kind of pushed in wrestling. If you go back to the Attitude Era, look at the guys who, when they first became like really breakout main event stars, like I think Steve Austin was like 32 when he won the world title for the first time. And then you got like The Undertaker was in his early 30s at the time. Triple H was in his 20s, I think, when he won the world championship for the first time, or he was like 30. The Rock was, I think, 26 or 27 years old when he won the title for the first time. Mick Foley, who people remember kind of being an older wrestler at the time, and he was probably I think he was 33 when he retired the first time. Yeah. He wasn't. It's not like there's this. It wasn't like those guys were old; they were young, and it's something that I think people have lost over time. I think Vince McMahon has lost the idea of age as he's gotten into his 60s and now 70s. Someone who's 40 doesn't seem old to him because he's 70, 74 years old. I think that's part of it. But ultimately, if you're looking to attract a younger audience, and WWE really should be, because their audience is getting older, as mentioned. Average wrestling viewer is 54 years old, And one of the things about WWE that's such a big problem, the reason that there are no younger fans, or there are much fewer younger fans, is because they haven't created any new fans in the last 20 years. They're still kind of riding the highs of the Attitude Era and the fans that they created during the Attitude Era, which were, younger people in their teens and 20s. But now that we're 20 years removed from the Attitude Era or more, when those people first got invested in the product, those people are going to start, aging out of the key demographic. And we talk, Raw and SmackDown are generally number one in the key demo most weeks. And yeah, that's great. But they used to be like run away, no one touches them, number one in the demo. It's not like, oh yeah, we were, number one by this and someone else was close, or, we were number two this week and we're number one next week. Or it used to never be close. And now it's like, yeah, they're solidly number one most weeks, but it's becoming more and more of a struggle to hold on to that dominant position in the key demo because their fan base is getting older and they need to create new stars. They need to get younger. And, and compared to AEW, I have this from this week. So this is just using Raw and comparing it to Dynamite this week. So Raw had their demographic rating for 50 plus was 0.96. So people over 50 was 0.96.
Yeah. Okay.
And their demographic in 18 to 49 was 0.57. Now, the 0.57 number is good, for the most part. It's number one on cable. But they're almost double in 50 and up, which is, why that the average age of wrestling viewer is 54 years old, because all those people are over 50. AEW, they did a 0.43 in 50 and over and a 0.42 in 18 to 49 this week. So that shows Dynamite's audience is younger skewing than WWE's. In fact, Dynamite this week actually had beat the third hour of SmackDown in, I think, 18 to 49.
The third hour Raw?
Beat the third hour Raw.
Yeah, okay.
I'm trying to remember if it was 18 to 49 or males 18 to 49. But either way, Dynamite got close, and that's with way less viewers. We're talking about 1 million viewers for Dynamite and almost 2 million viewers for Raw, and yet Dynamite had more younger viewers than Raw did in its third hour. That just shows you how younger skewing it is, and we can ask ourselves, why is that? Why is Dynamite successful in attracting younger viewers than Raw? Raw has a lot more. WWE has a lot more money. They have a way more brand recognition. Why is one successful, showing more success, to scale than Raw? And I think a key issue is the age of the performers, and that WWE has just historically leaned on older wrestlers. Like you kind of mentioned Drew McIntyre and Roman Reigns as the guys in their mid to late 30s. That's kind of old in comparison to, other professional sports. Those guys are like the young guys. Right. I mean, you look at Drew McIntyre versus Bobby Lashley at WrestleMania for the world title. Bobby Lashley's 44 years old. Now, he looks great for 44. He doesn't look like he's 44 years old, but he's 44. Daniel Bryan, I think, is 39, going to be 40.
Yep.
And Edge is, how old was Edge? Is he 48?
Very close. 47, maybe.
Yeah. So Edge is in his late 40s. Old people, right? And that doesn't, I don't think, there's a place for those wrestlers, but it's been a consistent trend with WWE where it's pushing older people ahead of the younger talents to the degree that the younger talent just sits around forever and kind of ages out of being younger talent. And then if they finally get pushed, they're kind of old talent. Cesaro is a perfect example. I'm happy Cesaro is getting a push. I'm happy that Cesaro is going to wrestle for the world title. He deserves it. He's a great talent. The time to push Cesaro was 10 years ago when he was 30, not now when he's 40.
Yep.
But because Cesaro had to wait, because WWE, had to run big programs with Brock Lesnar and John Cena and Goldberg and The Undertaker and Triple H and all of these wrestlers from older eras that came in and occupied so much time and got main event pushes. that people like Cesaro had to wait until they kind of aged out of their prime. And Cesaro can still go at his prime level. It's not necessarily about capability, but you do have to send a message to your fan base that you want to push younger people that people can relate to. There's a reason me and you can relate to Darby Allen I can relate to Darby Allen more than Cesaro. And that's, there's a lot of different things going on there. They're totally different people from totally different backgrounds. But Darby being a young guy is a big part of that. Yeah. And Cesaro's 13 years older than me. He's, like my older cousin or my uncle. He's not like, sure. He's not like a young guy. And I just think that you look at AEW's roster and yeah, okay, they got Chris Jericho, who's an older guy. And, they've got Danielson Kazarian, and they've got, Dustin Rhodes, Billy Gunn. It's not like they don't have any young guys, but with the exception of Jericho, the older guys are basically enhancement talent or guys who are working the mid card, guys who and you need that. You can't have a roster full of young people, but you just look at MJF, who's 25. You got Jungle Boy, who I think is like 23.
Yep.
You got Darby, obviously. You got, I think Britt is only like 28, 29 years old. You've got people, not just people who are in their 20s, but people who are like real stars now in their 20s, or people that are going to push when you're in 20s. I am intrigued by Dante Martin of Top Flight because he's 20 and he was signed when he was 19. And I don't always watch Dark, but I saw he had a match with Danny Limelight on Dark this week that some people were gifting. And I was like, damn, I want to see this because I'm so intrigued by someone who's only 20 years old because I'm like, holy shit, this guy's 20. Like this guy's half the age of Cesaro. And I don't want to keep using Cesaro as a barometer of age because I could use anyone else. But the idea, they're not doing anything. Obviously, Dante Martin had tough luck with his. He's brought in as a tag team with his brother, and his brother blew out his I think he tore his ACL. So and so he's kind of been put on the back burner, just kind of working singles matches. But even so, they're not doing anything major with him. But he's in the company. He's 20. He could be in the company for 5 more years and still be like younger than anyone else in WWE. So. And that's intriguing to me, and I think it's intriguing to young people. I'm ranting, so I want you jump in. You got anything? What do you think?
Yeah, obviously people can use Kenny Omega as a counter. Kenny Omega's 37. I just looked up Orange Cassidy's age. He's 37 as well, and so I think people can use that as an example. But I think
that's fine. I don't think mid to late 30s is bad for a established top talent.
Right. But I think the big thing is that the younger talent are kept relevant in AEW. I think that's the big thing. Like Ricochet, like he had a match at main event. No one watches main event. Even Mustafa Ali, they're redoing their main event feud. No one cares what's going on there. Even Sheamus, as U.S. champion, he's basically burying Mansoor and Humberto Carrillo, Angel Garza. Like he has this Rose gimmick. He's like kicking roses up people's butts.
Hey, at least he didn't do a job.
Yeah, fair enough. He won, but still, it's not really a young person's gimmick to kick roses up another person's butts. And so even WWE, where they do have younger talent is their women's division, but their women's division, as we see, especially on Raw, has not been booked very well. Rhea Ripley is kind of an afterthought as a champion, despite her groundbreaking achievement at WrestleMania. Bianca Belair, they're doing pretty well so far with her. I think Bayley looks like she's going to be the next in line to go up against her, so that's going to help Bianca Belair as a champion. But still, for overall on the main roster, especially on Raw, everyone is an afterthought in that division. They keep wanting to go back to that Charlotte well. They want Becky back so bad. You can just tell they're just waiting for Becky to get some sort of clearance some clearing of the pandemic away so that she can come back and also be a mom at the same time. And also Ronda Rousey, like, you know, I'm sure they are devastated when like she was pregnant, which congrats to her for starting her own family. But I'm sure for WWE, despite what they said in public, I'm sure like they probably aren't happy that, you know, their top money draw is not coming back, which is bad because like you should be relying on one person to save your company.
Yeah, and I think with the women's division in WWE in general, it's like a lot of things are crappily booked,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not always connected to age. I do think that in the women's division now, women historically women have been younger than men when it comes to how they're used in pro wrestling. And like as we talked about last or 2 weeks ago with Mickie James and that kind of whole thing, which is like Mickie James is like 40 and she's being put out to pasture, and men like, again, I'll use Cesaro as an example, or like they're finally getting their big push when they're 40. Like you have to be at least 40 to get a big push in WWE if you're a man, but if you're a woman, you're like 100 years old if you're 40. But you look at, you know, who are the women that are getting pushed right now in WWE besides, you know, or not obviously Belair, who I think is in her early 30s, and then Ripley, who's really young. I think she's only like 25.
Yep.
You know, you look, Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax are both in their late 30s. Natalia's in her late 30s, I think. Even people like Charlotte, Bayley, Sasha Banks, they're in their early to mid 30s. And you know, like, there's no real reason why a woman couldn't still be a big drawing regular wrestler into their 40s. But I know in like regular real sports, women tend to age out a little bit earlier than men. Mm-hmm. I don't have any data to back that up, but it's common for like women to start earlier. You know, they might reach their athletic peak earlier, but they might go away. And then, you know, there's different, you know, reasons for that. There's obviously some of it is kind of like cultural pressure to retire and start a family and that kind of thing. But someone like, you know, Serena Williams is like a record setting machine because she's like still competing at a high level when she's in her like mid 30s. And so there might be something, I don't know if there's anything like you could actually point to and say like, oh, women athletes peak earlier, but that's beside the point. But you would think that the women's division is younger than the men's division, and it is, but it's still not. And to me, it's all about, it's not even as much about age as is about creating characters that will connect with younger audiences. Mm-hmm. And it helps that if those people are young themselves. You can just look at whatever celebrities or entertainers are popular with teenagers or kids, and think about the average age of those people. And the average age is not 40 years old. It's younger people. It's, you know, I'll use Billie Eilish as an example because I know she's someone that the kids are into. She's like 18 years old or 19 years old right now. Mm-hmm. Look, there's a reason she's popular with young people, and it's because she's 18 or 19, not because she's 40. Kids can feel like they connect with her and relate to her music than they can necessarily with, you know, music of older people who might be just as talented. But it's all about connecting. I mean, when you watch every show on every kid's show is usually about a teenager or a kid or mm-hmm. someone at the very most who's like 20. It's not about someone who's 40 because kids are into seeing people who are close to their age. It's just a fact of culture, of pop culture in general. And so for some reason, wrestling's sometimes behind that, in that I get it. That's why I point to someone like Darby Allen, who is like a character you would see on like a teen drama, or Jungle Boy, who, you know, obviously his dad was a character on a teen drama.
Yes.
And he looks just like him. So it helps, but that's one of the reasons Jungle Boy is so appealing, is because like he looks like he could be on a teen drama, and that's probably why he's popular, is because he has that kind of appeal. And, you know, you can go up and down the list of people that have that kind of character. I thought, you know, Bayley, Dave Meltzer made this point a while ago when Bayley was still in NXT, and he kind of took some shit for it, but I think he was right in saying it, which was that he said Bayley, who I think Bayley's like 34, maybe like 33 now, but this was probably like almost 5 years ago, or when she was still in NXT. So this is kind of a while ago. And he was saying like, they need to call up Bayley to the main roster like as soon as possible, because the gimmick that she's doing now, which is the hugger gimmick and the Bayley gimmick, that gimmick works when she's in her 20s. It might not work when she's in her 30s. And the point he made by that was he was saying, like, the gimmick is that she's supposed to be like the cool older sister to these, younger girls.
Mm-hmm.
And if she, it's easier to do that when you're in your 20s than if you're, in your mid 30s. And Bayley, has evolved where she's not that gimmick anymore. And it makes sense. And I like the way that her character has evolved because she couldn't do that forever. But I thought it was a real good point because, and he said, like, look at who are the actresses on Disney Channel shows. They're not people in their 30s. They're people in their 20s. And that's kind of true. And maybe it's in WWE system. People just take forever to get called up from NXT now, that they're not getting called up when they're in their primes. And even if you look at I did this like last year, so it might not be accurate, but I was looking at like how many people on the main roster are in their 20s. And the answer is like, you can count them on one hand. I know Otis, I think, is 29. So he's one. Alexa Bliss is like 29 or 30. I think she's 30 now, so she might be off the list. You got Dominic, who is legitimately really young. He's like 24. Rhea Ripley now. I think Mansoor, who's only like 25 or 26. Of course, he just signed on the main roster. Mm-hmm. I think Humberto is still really young. I think Angel Garza might be young. But I think that's it. Like it's really small number of people who are and out of those people, it's not like a lot of them are doing stuff. It's not like Dominic Mysterio's doing a lot. It's not like, Mansoor or Humberto Carrillo are doing a lot. It's not like those people are pushed as opposed to AEW names, like people like Darby, people like Britt Baker, people like Jungle Boy, MJF. Like those guys those people are getting, pushed to various degrees. Some of them are being pushed right into the main event. So, or Hangman's another one who I think is under 30. And obviously he's, a legit big star. So, so to me, it's just like, it's really like WWE needs to get younger in some way. And that's why I've always been a big fan of Toni Storm. Cause I was like, Toni Storm's character is that she's like this like cool tomboy chick that everyone likes. And it works because she's young and people can like relate to her. If you're a high school student, you can kind of relate to her. If she's in NXT for 10 years and she's, 30, 31 when she gets called up, it's just a different dynamic. And I'm trying not to be like ageist about it or anything, but I think it's just a fact that people will have a harder time connecting with her character if she's not up in 5 years.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, it's even like you said before, you bring up like music examples. Like I'm a K-pop fan, and so like when K-pop groups originally debuted, they market towards an audience. But then as over the years, they mature their music and mature their style because they're growing with their audience. And so that's what wrestling should be doing. Like you said before, Toni Storm, like now is the time to really mark a shin on, making her the top star for the young people. But, she's putting over the young people for some reason, or the newer stars. And, I think that idea with WWE, the fact that you have to wait a couple of years before, to pay your dues, quote unquote, I think that's a turnoff for young people. I think if you told someone that, like, oh, why isn't that person being pushed? Oh, well, they have to pay their dues, have to, put in the work for a couple of years. It's like, what? Why? It's like the people. I think people our generation don't like that idea. They have to wait for something to happen, especially with all the other social political things going on, like climate change, like something basic, for example. I think people have been waiting for too long for something to happen, and I think people will feel the same way about WWE wrestlers. Oh, why is Ricochet have to wait for his turn? Like, why can't his turn be now? Like, he's only getting older. And it's Toni Storm, like you said before, like, why does she have to wait for her turn? Like, why does she have to be behind the line behind Mercedes Martinez or any other wrestlers that are pushes for the women's title right now? And it's just disappointing. I think people, if you told someone that, especially for a younger person, whereas opposed you see like an AEW where guys like Darby Allen, yeah, sure, they had to pay a couple dues here and there. Like, it wasn't Darby wasn't really like the number one contender right away. I mean, kind of was in some ways, but you know what I mean. Like he did have this gradual rise to where he is now. It wasn't that he was on the undercard or working a bunch of AEW darks for the whole his whole time running out, and then now he's the big guy. It's no, he was on Dynamites every week, and they're building him up until now he's the TNT champion. To where, yeah, he is, getting this big push now, and you see this progression from Jungle Boy as well. Jungle Boy is building himself up tag division. He's getting these big singles matches. Dax Harwood, that was a big breakout for him as a singles competitor. We talked about this off air. He has this very entertaining theme song that everyone else sings, especially the commentators. And so that's really building up Jungle Boy to eventually, maybe a TNT champion or AEW champion, depending where direction they're going. But you definitely see a path to where these younger stars are going. Unlike in WWE, like Dominic, like what's his path? Like we don't know what he's going to do. He's probably going to be a tag champion of his dad, but then there's their further direction for Dominic after that. Like, I don't really see where he's going to go. But for everyone else, you can't see where he's going to go. For Edge, you could see that, he's probably going to get the world title again someday, or he's just going to, be the veteran working everybody else. Same with Drew McIntyre, all these other guys. There's clear paths for the older guys, but for the younger guys, there's a really clear path for them in their futures.
Yeah, I mean, they're not really pushing anybody who, at least on the men's side. On the women's side, you can say that they are legitimately pushing Rhea Ripley. Has it gone super well so far? I would say probably not, but they are at least pushing her. Yeah, right on the men's side, like, Otis is a guy under 30. What's he going to do? Like, what's his path? Like, I don't know. And that's part of it is a WWE problem. WWE's bad at elevating their talent in general. So obviously younger wrestlers are going to be a symptom of that. You raised an interesting point about like younger fans, like millennials or Gen Zers, who, would reject the concept of, you got to pay your dues. Mm-hmm. And because young people, in life, in their professional lives, in their scholastic lives, are told, you got to wait your turn, you got to do this, you got to do that. Boomers aren't going to retire, so young people are just stuck in these entry-level positions forever and ever. And there's a lot of angst that goes into that. And is that, like, people are going to reject that in their wrestling? They're not going to want to see, like, why should Ricochet have to wait his turn? He's as good as all of these people. Why is he, he's just got to spend a little bit more time. And you got to, like, pay your dues is like, to me, like, paying your dues is like going to wrestling school and like working the indies. It's not like, you like, you got to sit on the roster for 10 years and then we'll use you. Because you want to know what? Steve Austin didn't sit on the WWF roster for 10 years and then get pushed. The Rock didn't spend 10 years on the WWE roster and get pushed. The Undertaker didn't spend 10 years on the roster and get pushed. Triple H didn't spend 10 years on the undercard roster and get pushed. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like these, the older wrestlers spent forever as mid-carders and then got elevated. There are a few people you can say, like Bret Hart spent a long time as a mid-carder before becoming a top guy. But most of the time, the big stars were, people who got big pushes right out of the gate and were pushed as big stars. Like, so it's not like the idea is like the idea that, you've got to pay your dues for 5 or 10 years, being directionless on the mid card and then get a push. Like, that hasn't proven to really work out for many people and has not been the formula that has been proven to be successful when it comes to elevating talent. One of the things I like about certain promotions, and Dragon Gate in Japan is the best at this, is they just push people who are like 20.
Yep.
Sure, Sean Skywalker, you're 22 years old. Like, if you're good enough, we're just going to push you. And there's, SB Kento's a rookie. Hip Hop Kakuta. I might have just butchered his name. Hip Hop, I'm going to call him. Got a title shot when he was like 20 or 21, and they've only been wrestling for like a year. And the idea is like, look, we're going to go all in on our youth. You're not going to have to wait your turn, because you want to know what? In real sports, people don't wait their turn.
Yep.
Like, Zion Williamson is not like, all right, Zion, you're coming off the bench for the first few years, and then we'll work you into the rotation. It's, no, this guy's going to be the face of our franchise. We're going to market him everywhere. We're going to try to play him as much as possible, because he's the best, and they want to, we need him to be really good for us to be successful. There's the idea that you're like breaking people in is kind of dumb.
Even like the traditional, like, football idea. Like, the quarterback has to wait, sit out a year before he has to play. But I look at like Justin Fields, he gets drafted by Chicago. Everyone wants him to start right away because like, no, screw that. Like this guy's good. He's the Andy Dalton. He has to start on day one. Lionel Messi, he started when he was like what 18 something back in Barcelona. Like he didn't wait his turn for Ronaldinho left the team. Like he was playing with him, and then became a big star on his own. Like we're seeing all over in real other sports. Waiting your turn is not a real thing in any walk of life.
Yeah, I know, and I definitely think that's true. And even if it, like, yeah, I think you're dead on that regards. And WWE has the extra hurdle of having, okay, if you get signed, then you got to go to NXT. Not everyone does. There's been some exceptions, but for the most part, it's like you got to go to NXT, and then but you can't just get pushed right away in NXT anymore. You got to work your way up. So now you're going to spend time, in NXT, working your way up to NXT, which is going to take a few years maybe. And then you're going to be, have a few years on top of NXT. And then you're going to get called up to the main roster. And then you're going to do a few years working your way up on the main roster. And then maybe you'll be a main eventer on the main roster. I mean, I'll use, you can see people kind of heading down that path. I'll use Shane Strickland as an example, who I think Shane Strickland's like 31 right now, but he was signed like 3 or 4 years ago when he was like 27. So, or maybe he's like 28. So let's say he's 28. He signed 2 years ago and he's 28 and he's 30 now. He's like kind of just now maybe getting a real push, and he's got a stable now in NXT and he's getting like a real push forward, but he's already been in NXT for a few years. And so maybe he has 2 or 3 more years left in NXT where maybe he'll win the NXT world title and he'll be a main eventer, which is great for him to do that in NXT, but he'll spend 2 or 3 more years in NXT. Then he'll get called up to the main roster. Then I'll spend 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more years in the WWE mid-card. And then maybe he'll get a chance at the main event if he follows that path. And so if you look, by the time he hits that, he's going to be like 37 or 38. And you're going to go from someone who you signed as a hot prospect who was very good already in their 20s, and spent 10 years moving him up this, ranking, this archaic, hierarchy until he was able to get a push into the main event when he's in his late 30s. And by that point, and God forbid he picks up an injury over that same time period and then he gets that whole setback. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't seem to be that productive when it comes to elevating talent. But I think to get back to what we're kind of talking about is finding those talents. And I think the key thing in WWE and the difference between WWE and AEW is that on one hand, AEW, the decision makers are people in their 30s who are going to be much more connected to modern culture, modern pop culture, and younger people than Vince McMahon. I'll give you an example of this. You remember when before they did the Hangman Page Kenny Omega match, I believe at was it Full Gear last November?
The tag match?
Yeah. No. They're like kind of like their singles match that started. It was at Full Gear.
Yeah, Full Gear.
It was a number 1 contenders match at Full Gear that they had, and they did the breakup video with the "You don't know what you got until it's gone" song. And they did that whole thing, and people were talking about it. So that week, Tony Khan was on a podcast, and they asked him about that, and he said, "Oh, like I was watching this episode of South Park where Stan breaks up with his girlfriend, and they play that song, and I thought it would be kind of funny to play that song on Dynamite between Kenny and Hangman after they broke up." And it's like, okay, that's like a small thing, but do you think Vince McMahon's watching South Park and getting an idea from South Park?
Probably not. He's probably just watching a rerun of like the Honeymooners or whatever.
I don't know. He's probably not even watching television because he doesn't know. He isn't like.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, and that's just like, you could say, okay, that was just like a little video package he came up with. It's not like reinventing the wheel, but it's just the general idea behind having someone who's connected, who's much more closer to the younger generation than having someone in their 70s be the creative, head of the product, and getting people that are gonna find stuff that's connects with younger audience. Even if you just look at like the other people who are involved, you've got Bruce Pritchard, who's in his late 50s, I think. You've got Road Dogg, same thing, late 50s. John Laurinaitis is back as talent relations.
Paul Heyman.
Heyman, you know, and Heyman is in his 50s, and Heyman's like still a good, like, is much, you can tell with like the Roman Reigns storyline and stuff that he's like much more, he's just a better writer than those guys, and like understands the creative process and putting together a long-term storyline better than those guys. But even then, you're talking about older people who have been around wrestling for a billion years, and those people have their uses. But when it comes to creating compelling content that can captivate young people, you're gonna have younger writers involved. You look at the people who they get to direct Marvel movies, like because they kind of have a rotating cast of people who are directing Marvel movies. It's not people who are in their 60s and 70s. It's not a 77-year-old who's putting it together. It's, Ryan Coogler, or I know Chloe Zhao is doing one now. Like younger up and coming directors that I can't pronounce his name, the guy from New Zealand. Waititi?
Taika Waititi.
Yeah, like same thing. I think he's probably like in his 40s or something like that. I think Coogler's in his 40s too. But like young people who are closer to the younger people that are going to understand the culture, and lo and behold, they have a hand in creating the most culturally significant thing that we have in our society right now, which is Marvel superhero movies and likewise products. And I think when you have a 74-year-old guy who's got a tyrannical grip over what's being presented on our television each week, he's not going to come up with stuff that's going to connect with younger audiences. He's not going to understand characters that are designed to connect with younger audiences because he's 74 years old, and he's not like a 74-year-old that's like got his finger on the pulse of society. He's like a weird introverted guy who works 18 hours a day living in his own bubble where he controls this little wrestling universe and is not like out there, scrolling up and down Twitter and checking out Instagram influencers and, watching a ton of movies and television and listening to a bunch of modern music. It's a completely different philosophy between the two companies. And I think that plays a big role in AEW having more success with younger people than WWE, because ultimately the people that are in charge of the creative process are like two generations apart.
Yeah, I mean, just two things on that. One, on the AEW listening to younger people, I remember Cody Rhodes on a podcast, he's on the record saying that he asked Conan for advice on how to run a promotion. And one piece of advice Conan gave him was to listen to younger people, know what younger people are into. And so that was really insightful from Conan to tell Cody that. And obviously you see that run through. Like he admits, on the record, like, oh, I don't understand why this is popular, but hey, it is popular, so I'll run with it. It works. I don't understand it, but clearly someone else does. And so Cody has that humility to understand that, just because he doesn't like something, that doesn't mean it's bad. Unlike a Vince McMahon, where like, oh, that whatever that thing is, that's dumb. What I like is what matters. And, look at from The Observer, I think it was a couple weeks ago, when Kalisto got released, we found out that the whole Lucha House Party, the only reason that got invented was Lince Dorado came up with a stereotypical Mexican gimmick. He pitched that to Vince McMahon, knowing that Vince McMahon would like it. And lo and behold, Vince McMahon loved the Lucha House Party.
Lince Dorado, who is not Mexican, came up with the gimmick. Because like, oh yeah, Vince will like that because it's like racist
and that's so telling of how the decision making of WWE is, that like pitch a racist stereotypical gimmick and your boss will love it. And then Kalisto was miserable the whole time because this is not what he wanted to do with his career.
Yeah.
They all did a good job of selling the gimmick, but they obviously wasn't a fan of the gimmick.
Yeah, I know, and that's like a thing, and people aren't gonna. I guess kids would be interested in the Lucha House Party because they're colorful and they, Lucha. It's got like kind of like a children's television theme song.
But they lost all the time.
Or maybe I'm just thinking about Mucha Lucha, the classic. Do you ever watch Mucha Lucha?
Yeah, great show.
Lucha. Maybe I'm thinking that's the Lucha Dragons theme song. But anyway, Lucha Dragons aside, but it's a good point. It's like, like they brought in Bad Bunny, who helped their key demos. I think, there's a lot of data. He obviously came in around WrestleMania period where ratings are going to go up anyway. And what did he do? What did he not do? If you're Ryan Satin's barber, he was like the biggest draw in the world. But actually, specifically his beard barber. But like it was legit. Like Bad Bunny, I didn't really know anything about Bad Bunny. Like I didn't know who he was, but he was really popular with younger people. And that was like, it was in Bad Bunny, I think is like 26 or 27. So he's younger than like every other person on the WWE roster. And, he helped bring that kind of younger, I don't know if he helped bring a younger audience, but it was at least a worthy attempt. It's, is that going to be what you're going to do? You're going to bring in they had, what's his name? Jake Paul was at WrestleMania 2, and he's
Logan Paul.
Logan Paul was at WrestleMania, and he's a someone who's a YouTuber, who's, presumably popular with younger people. I do think that when it comes to reaching younger people, you do have to think about the mediums in play, and that in some ways, like wrestling would be better off like launching a new boom period and getting really over with a bunch of younger people if they had like a hot show on Netflix or a hot show on Hulu or Disney Plus.
Yeah, Peacock.
Yeah, Peacock's not like a young person like service though. Like it's not big enough for that. You're better off being on cable for sure than you are being on Peacock from a scope standpoint. But I do think about like shows that do really well on Netflix and stuff that can really just become the talk of the town and be really big newsmakers. It would be interesting to see if like AEW took like Dark Elevation or something. Look, actually, here's what I would do. If I was AEW, now they do have HBO Max. They're connected with HBO Max through Turner. Mm-hmm. I would take my best matches, best stuff, put together some sort of compilation, and I would try to get that ideally like on like Netflix. Just see what you could do, because I do think a path forward would be to have it pop up on people's Netflix algorithms. Be like, what is this, wrestling? I'll just turn this on. And I think you will introduce yourself to the younger people who are not flipping channels anymore. I never flip channels.
No.
And I grew up, flipping channels. You see, what's on Nickelodeon? Nope. What's on Disney Channel? Nope. What's on Cartoon Network? Nope. ESPN, whatever. Like, I grew up doing that. I don't do that anymore. I know exactly what's on television when I turn on television. And if there's nothing on, I just go to a streaming service. I'm rarely just kind of seeing what's on. But that's the idea. That's the kind of an outdated model for wrestling. It's like you want people to click through channels, and they're going to see, this happening, or they're going to see this wrestler, and they're going to stop. That's the idea. But that's so outdated. Like, who does that? Like, nobody, and certainly no young people. So what you're going to end up have like a better way would be to have your content pop up, whether it's in YouTube recommendations or on Netflix or, Hulu maybe, and you'll get more people that way. And I do think if you take your best stuff and put it out there, I think it would be a worthy endeavor just to get people who maybe might really like wrestling. They don't know anything about it, but they're not necessarily closed-minded towards it. And they'll be introduced to it in a way that because they're not picking up that remote. They're not clicking through if they're under the age of 30. It's just not happening. Mm-hmm. You're not going to like just, oh, what's this wrestling? And be like, oh, I don't even know what that is. I'm going to keep going. I think you're better off getting something like on one of the streaming services, just because that's what young people are watching, and you need to be on those mediums. And part of it, this whole thing is that, like the reason I think some people are shocked when the average age of viewer is 54 years old is because they are like, if you're a big wrestling fan, you're on social media, it kind of warps the perception of who wrestling fans are, because social media is obviously going to have more young people because it's social media. So it's going to be dominated by people in their 20s and 30s. Or teenagers, as opposed to people who are over the age of 50. So you're not going to see those fans. You're not going to hear from those fans in the same way you're going to hear from the younger people. And I do think that kind of warps the perception of who wrestling fans are in general. The statistics show that they're much older than I think you would get if you were just to, look at who's talking about wrestling on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just touching on the Bad Bunny thing, I think during the period he was on television, it was successful. But I think you see Damian Priest's booking now, it has not been well. And I think that's a big part of WWE's problem is that they understand the reach of celebrities. Like Bad Bunny has a huge reach. They don't know what to do after that. Like using like the 80s, for example, Cyndi Lauper was a big selling point, but it's not like they sat on their laurels and just like, oh, hey, Cindy's here. And then they did nothing after that. Like they clearly kept pushing Hulk Hogan after that, Roddy Piper, Mr. T, they kept that going for as long as they did. They just end just after the celebrity left. But for WWE, they bring the celebrity in, and then after the celebrity leaves, that's kind of it for that performer. Like, like tough luck for you. Your relevancy just drops through the basements. Especially for Damian Priest. He has not really reach those same highs as he did with Bad Bunny.
When Steve Austin had his showdown with Mike Tyson, he did not then spend subsequent weeks just repeating matches against The Miz.
Yes.
He was, he was pushed as the dominant world champion. But you're right. Yeah, when Mojo Rawley won, he wins the Andre the Giant Battle Memorial at WrestleMania with Gronk's involvement. The idea is like, oh, we use Gronk and he makes Mojo Rawley look good. What did Mojo Rawley do after that? Absolutely nothing.
Show the trophy to kids.
Yeah, like nothing. Like, and you're right about the follow-up. It's like, okay, we're going to use Bad Bunny, and he's going to help Damian Priest get over. I'm like, okay, this is a smart move because you're using the celebrity and using the interest. Damian Priest checks a lot of the boxes of what you want as a wrestler, although he's another one who's like a new young wrestler, and he's like 39.
Yeah.
But, beside that, he's got a good look. He's got a good voice. He can work in the ring. He looks cool. Like if you see him if you see him like, oh, this is this giant guy, throwing these karate kicks and stuff. But you're right. Like what's the follow up to that? Is it like he should be like in the world title mix,
or at least feuding with Sheamus for the U.S. title.
Yeah. Like what do you do? Yeah. What are you doing with him? Like, he just seems like he's just a guy on the roster that's around to kill time, which pretty much everyone on Raw, that's basically their entire job, is to try to just find a way to kill the 3 hours each week. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you should have, and that's part of the problem with WWE in general, is that they just, the idea of having a really long-term cohesive plan for somebody is like foreign, unless it's like Roman Reigns. Then Roman Reigns gets one. But everyone else is just kind of like, well, month to month, we'll see what you do. And you can win a feud, and then we can never see you again. You can break up with your tag team partner and never have a follow-up with it. You can win a match, and then we just never see you again. Like, it's then you're off TV for a month. They don't follow up with their talent at all. And that does hurt people, who are trying to establish themselves, which are inherently going to be younger wrestlers.
Yeah, even look at like Omos, I think with AJ, he's like 24, and then he's tag team champion. But at the same time, it's like, what are you doing with him? Like, he's just a tall guy, and he's decent in the ring. But at the same time, it's like, I don't really see what they're doing with him. Like, he's just there with the tag title. He's hanging off AJ. It just seems more like a vehicle for AJ to remain relevant for himself. It doesn't really seem like they're elevating Omos anytime soon.
Oh, well, I think that they're using AJ to elevate Omos because, like, first of all, AJ is like super overqualified for this role.
Exactly.
To be like the guy who can work in the Omos tag team. Like, Drew Gulak could have AJ's role, and it could be the exact same. And AJ could go be like a main eventer, like somewhere else where he would desperately be needed to be. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were off television for a while. People don't know why. It would seem to me that it would probably be COVID related because they were big stars at WrestleMania, and they're, almost in the AJ match was one of the key talking points, almost winning the tag titles. And like, I thought he looked kind of bad in the match, but everyone was saying he looked great. The standard's low.
He's fine.
He's just enormous human being. So it works. Like, I understand what they're doing with him. But he was like kind of hot. Like, people were talking about him, oh yeah, we're going to, like, and then they just weren't on Raw for 2 or 3 weeks after WrestleMania. And then they showed up and they had like a WrestleMania rematch that went the exact same way on Raw. Yeah, I don't know what they're doing wrong with him. I think they're limited on what they can do with him.
Sure.
it kind of reminds me of like a Giant Gonzalez like situation where like Giant Gonzalez comes in and he works a program with the Undertaker, and that program did kind of draw, like it was kind of a significant program. But once that was over, it's like, okay, what do we do with this guy? Because he's not that versatile. We don't want to make him world champion, and then he's gone. And that's what happens with sometimes. But you're right about like, what was the follow up? There was no what's the follow up for him? Like, what's the end game with Almost? Like, people make fun of Kali, but when they brought in Kali, like, he worked a big long program with the Undertaker, and they did. They were supposed to have the Punjabi prison match, which they didn't end up having, famously, because he got like, you remember that, like, Great Khali was going to wrestle Undertaker in the Punjabi prison match.
Yeah.
And then like the day of the match, like this is their blow off feud, he had some sort of medical scare, and like he couldn't do it. And then Big Show, I think, stepped in. Big Show just randomly wrestled the Undertaker in the Punjabi prison match because they had to give them the Punjabi prison match. So like, and it was one of those weird things, but like they had a plan for Khali when he came in, and they pushed him. And you could say like Khali was a terrible wrestler and they shouldn't have pushed him or whatever, but they at least had a plan where he worked a really long feud that was somewhat successful. At least I remember it being successful. For all I know, someone can go back and say, well, actually the pay-per-view, the headline did this. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't, but the point was they had a plan. And you don't have any faith that they're going to have they have plans for Almost, or, it almost is one of their younger people. I don't know if they're going to have plans for, they don't have any plans for Otis.
Nope.
Like, what are the plans they have for Mansoor? I always thought the Mansoor thing was weird because, they clearly had him because they wanted to have a Saudi Arabian wrestler, on these shows, and he would only show up at these on the Saudi Arabia shows, and then you would never hear or see of him ever again. But the weird thing with him was that he's pretty good. Like, he's not just a guy that they were pushing because, he was being pushed just because he was Saudi Arabian, but like he was legitimately talented, and he wasn't unjustified to have him, win some matches. The only problem was that he was never on television outside of it. And similar thing, like, do they have any plans for him? I guess they brought him on television, so they must have some plans for him, because previously he wasn't on, Raw or SmackDown. He was just kind of like winning all his matches on Main Event, going on a Goldberg-esque winning streak on Main Event. And look at the other guys. Look, we've seen people like Humberto Carrillo, they get pushed for a few weeks and they're off television for a few months. Angel Garza, the same thing, pushed for, a month or two. He had that whole thing with the girl from The Bachelor, and then she just disappeared and nothing happened for him. No follow-up.
That's right.
You can go up and down the list. The Mysterios like pop in and out randomly. Like almost, they had that huge storyline with, Buddy Murphy and Aaliyah and Seth Rollins and the Mysterio family, and that was just dropped cold turkey. Okay, what's Dominic doing? Gone.
Look at Andrade.
Yeah,
he left the company.
Yeah, or Pac was there. Sat out for
yeah.
That's different. When you're sitting out and stuff, that's different than like WWE just being like, we got nothing for you.
Yeah.
Have fun at home, collect your checks. All right, so you got anything else to say? We gotta wrap this up.
No, there's nothing really much else to add. I think it's just the big takeaway from all this is that younger wrestlers are a really big driving part to really push your young audience. And I think having a clear direction is at least something. At least you're trying to do something with your younger talent. Whether they're good or not is another story, but at least you're pushing younger talent. I think that's the big thing that we both want to see, is that younger talent being pushed. Again, whether that talent is that good or not, like, whatever, at least they're getting pushed. The big takeaway.
Yeah, this is a big topic for me. Like, I think there's so much you can talk about when it comes to what you can do to build new wrestling fans. And I think my big takeaway is, if people want wrestling to be big again, if you want another boom period in wrestling, it's going to come with creating new fans, and those fans are going to be younger. That's how it's worked historically, in the 80s and then later in the 90s. It's not going to be winning back all the Attitude Era fans. They're gone. They're not coming back. But if you build a product that catches on with people in their teens and their 20s, you might have something where you can suddenly add 1 million or 2 million or 3 million fans to your weekly show. And I do think it's possible, but We haven't seen a big effort from people to try that. I think AEW's close. WWE's got a long way to go when it comes to that, and I think that's the key takeaway. So thanks for everyone for listening. Hopefully our process on Zoom was a lot cleaner than our Skype process. So I appreciate everyone sticking around, and like, comment, subscribe to this video. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any topics you'd like to discuss, have us discuss, because we're open to that. Let us know, and thanks a lot for listening.